we are going to continue looking at goals of the American Revolution and working towards evaluating whether or not those goals were realized by the new American government. So continuing with what were the goals of the revolution and were they achieved, and then providing evidence for that. And what we're going to focus on is Daniel Shays Rebellion, and we're going to use this tomorrow in class. So I want to give you just some background on it. And I'm going to give you some background on it using evidence from the two different sources that we had to look at. So if you could have out your textbook, the reading that I gave you at the end of class today, and then your video notes, we'll talk through this a little bit. The idea here is to consider which goal are we talking about when we read this portion of the textbook. So what I have on the screen here right now is just on page 140 of your textbook. And so right here under this section of Farmers' Revolt in Massachusetts, it starts out by talking about a slowdown in the economy, and because of that slowdown in the economy, the people who had loaned money were asking for their money to be repaid, but a lot of Americans, specifically farmers, and it says most Americans were farmers, and most were in debt, and it's saying that they lacked the cash to pay back their debts. And what ends up happening after the revolution is that the people who had loaned them money start to ask the government for help in getting their loans repaid. And what the government does is they create courts to hear these trials. When the farmers can't repay their debts, they begin to do a few things. I think there's some examples in here. Losing lawsuits for debt, the farmers would face the loss of their crops, livestock, and even their farms to foreclosure. So here's what I want you to consider. One of the goals that we talked about in class yesterday, in both classes, was this idea of equality, opportunity. One of the goals of the revolution was to give Americans a chance at a better situation than they had under England. And so if you think of these farmers, most Americans, and you think of them as the people who likely were the ones that had to fight the American Revolution, here's the situation they're in now. And so what we're trying to figure out is, are they gaining those opportunities? Are they gaining the equality that they were looking for? And so then the book goes on, and I'm going to skip to the next page here. The book goes on page 141 to then talk about, right here, the elected leaders of Massachusetts. So not the farmers now, the people who were in charge, the government, the new state government, not England, Americans and other Americans, right? The elected leaders of Massachusetts insisted that the new republic could not survive, right, if people violently interfered with the courts. And so the state raised an army, and they marched that army west to suppress these farmers who were being led by somebody named Daniel Shays. And so when we look at this section right here, right, what we have here is we have the makings of a conflict between Americans. The Eastern leaders, right, the people in Boston, the ones who maybe benefited the most from the revolution, the ones who are on the side of the lenders, the creditors, and then you have most Americans, the ones who are in debt, the ones who are looking for what exactly did they fight this American Revolution for. When we switch to the other document, okay, and I'm just going to point out a few things here for you, and hopefully I can do this quickly. If we look at right down here, right, we have before Daniel Shays, this is pre-Daniel Shays, we have this guy, Job Shattuck, and in Concord, right, in 1786, this guy is, he is setting up in the middle of the town. He's setting up blockades. He's trying to protect the rights of the debtors. And what's interesting here is if we go back to the textbook, right, we have, I'm sorry, whoops, that's the wrong one. If we look at the textbook here, we have evidence of I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. We have evidence of the Eastern, right, the Eastern establishment, the Eastern Massachusetts sending an army to the West. Well, in your textbook, now look at the evidence here. So we get this impression, right, that there's this army that marches west, and they're going to shut down the rebellion. But look at the other reading that I gave you, and look at right here. The sheriff looked to the militia to defend the court against these armed farmers. Now look at this. Look at this evidence. But most of the militia was with Luke Day. And Luke Day is like Job Shattuck. He is another one of these people, like Daniel Shays, who is rallying for the farmers. Now we look here, right? Remember, we're looking for evidence that either the goals were being realized and achieved or they weren't. So now we come up here. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Okay, we come here, and so we have, in this section, if you were to read this section, you'd see, right, the militia of 1,000 faced a square crowded with armed men and boys. And then this next part is really important, right? The militia was split in its opinion. And look at what the leader of the militia did, right? One of the court leaders did. He said, okay, if the militia is divided over this, and there's 1,000 men in the militia who are there to put down the rebellion, he said, we're gonna have them divide up. If you are for the courts, go on this side of the road. If you are for the farmers, go on this side. And 800 of them went to the side that would have been with the farmers. So the book doesn't necessarily provide you with that evidence that, it just says this militia went out there and then essentially the rebellion ends. But there's more to it. And then the other thing that we have to look at are, where are the leaders of the American Revolution on this? And one of the names that we associate with the American Revolution very readily is Samuel Adams, right? He's one of the founding members of the Sons of Liberty. He is a leader in the American Revolution, especially when it comes to the philosophy of it. He's, it says it right here. Once he was looked at as a radical leader in Boston. Now, while all this rebellion's going on, he said that he thought that maybe the British were behind it, that they were stirring up the farmers. So he's like starting a conspiracy theory. He will also, I think there's another Daniel Shays quote another Samuel Adams quote in a page here. These newly established leaders of the new America, they don't want to see what they're starting fail, and these questions to the authority of these state governments seem to question the authority of the leaders of the revolution. There's some other good evidence here that I would point out, specifically in this last paragraph, right? When we get to Daniel Shays, right? We get to the Daniel Shays situation, and now what he does, right, is he is indicted, right? 3 of his friends, and they are indicted of crimes of disorderly, riotous, seditious persons. Like they're being villainized, right? And when we look at the reaction, let me just flip to my page here so I can see the notes the evidence and notes that I want to share with you as you're reading through this. And I would suggest that you read this. I'm gonna wrap up the video here so you can go through some of this in a minute on your own. But look at some of the reactions from revolutionary leaders, right? Right? The general court, this guy, they were to vindicate the government. And then you have somebody like Sam Adams helps to draw up something called the Riot Act, which is basically saying that these men who are out there that are protesting the laws, they are protesting the government in being against the farmers. They're doing all of the things that the leaders of the revolution had done to England. And so what I want to leave you with, 2 concepts that I want you to come tomorrow prepared to kind of discuss your thinking on, right, is this idea of distant authority and local control. In the context of the revolution, the distant authority was England, and the colonists were seeking local control. But now here we have an example in Massachusetts where we have what is being viewed as a distant authority in Boston, and the laws that are being set against the farmers. And what they want is some local control. What they want is they want to be able to voice their concerns and their opinions and have those actually make change. So what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to look at all this, and I recommend that you read the rest of this. And I want to cite some evidence in class tomorrow as to whether or not this goal of the revolution was achieved. And if it was, how? And if it wasn't, what's wrong? What evidence would we use to talk about either? So we'll be looking at that in class tomorrow. So read the rest of the Shays stuff. I put a couple of things on the Twitter feed. If you go to my website, there's a couple of links to some evidence that you could use that would be considered outside. So how do you get to a 4? All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow.